A reading from Hebrews. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them, those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves are being tortured. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host, and the host who has invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place, and then in disgrace you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Pharisees in the New Testament were not always critics of Jesus. It's important not to stereotype them. Sometimes some Pharisees argued with Jesus, and sometimes some Pharisees were hostile to Jesus. But apparently, sometimes some Pharisees invited him to their dinners, which suggests he was sometimes viewed by some Pharisees as a major teacher of the time. In today's story, when Jesus went to just such a dinner, they were watching him closely. Turnabout is fair play, though. Jesus was watching them too. Based on his observations at the dinner at the house of the leader of the Pharisees, Jesus declared 3 important characteristics for those who love God with all their heart and soul and mind and strength, and their neighbors as themselves: humility, hospitality, and honor. Humility leads me to say that there are many teachers and preachers much better at defining things than I am, and many people who speak or write much more eloquently than I do. So I want to share what 3 of those smarter, more eloquent people, teachers in our own time, had to say about humility, hospitality, and honor. About humility, Frederick Buechner wrote, "Humility is often confused with the gentlemanly self-deprecation of saying you're not much of a bridge player when you know perfectly well you are. Conscious or otherwise, this kind of humility is a form of gamesmanship. If you really aren't much of a bridge player, you're apt to be rather proud of yourself for admitting it so humbly. This kind of humility is a form of low comedy. True humility doesn't consist of thinking ill of yourself, but of not thinking of yourself much differently from the way you'd be apt to think of anybody else. It's the capacity for being no more and no less pleased when you play your own hand well than when your opponents do." Douglas John Hall had this to say about hospitality: "To describe the Christian alternative to being exclusive, I would propose we adopt the biblical language of hospitality. There is probably no greater admonition to the people of Israel than the frequently repeated law of hospitality. Except when it was totally misunderstood, the Hebrews' sense of being a special people never meant that being Jewish was by definition exclusive. Again and again, the prophets and lawgivers of Israel exhorted their people to exercise hospitality toward the stranger. Hospitality is not just a bit of morality, a command. It has its basis in the very heart of the gospel. Like all the key concepts of biblical faith, hospitality is a relational concept. I honor the otherness of the others because the important thing is really to relate to the others, not to absorb them into some supposedly neutral category, or more likely into one's own ego or prearranged worldview. The biblical exhortation is not smother others, but welcome them. That means, among other things, let them be themselves. Don't try to overcome the distance between you and them by robbing them of their difference. That difference is the presupposition of your achieving a real relationship with them. If we are ready to open ourselves to the other called Jesus, we shall discover both the possibility and the necessity of hospitality toward all the others. What is more important, that the whole world should become nominally and reluctantly Christian, or that some portion of the world in every age should live and teach real hospitality toward others. A hospitality that loves and serves others. A stewardly hospitality that does not have strings attached and does not offer itself only on the condition that others acknowledge the Christian sources of this hospitality. And Gerald Downing defined honor like this. Luke's gospel indicates that there were places reserved for distinguished guests, and the advice on table manners assumes that honor, not food, drink, or talk, were the diners and the hearers' overriding concern. Men had worth only in terms of the respect accorded them. Honor must be earned, and it could be lost. Moreover, one gained honor at the expense of others' honor. Men vied for respect, which could only be won at the expense of downgrading others. It was a zero-sum game. In the Jesus tradition, the leading critical term for that kind of honor is hypocrisy. Jesus' audience is told to avoid play acting, not to secure honor, but to enable usefulness. Seeking honor is not itself universally honored. And of course, though Jesus does come to glory and honor, it is only by despising honor. I found those to be three very thoughtful reflections on humility, hospitality, and honor. Each teacher had much more to say, but more isn't always better. Jesus, the smartest and most eloquent of all people and teachers, when it came to talking about God and God's ways, was able to say everything necessary about honor and humility in a 3-sentence story, and about hospitality in another 3 sentences. I have no doubt that everyone at the dinner got his point. If you didn't, I can suggest some good teachers for you to read. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John come to mind immediately. Amen.